It was 3:47 in the morning when the phone rang. 3 short rings, sharp, hollow, cutting through the kind of silence that only exists before dawn. At 63, I'd learned that calls at this hour never bring good news. Still half asleep, I reached for the phone on instinct. Hello Static buzzed for a second. Then a calm but urgent female voice came through. Mr. Reed, my name is Dr. Laura Kim. I'm a social worker at St. Mary's Hospital in Seattle. I'm calling about your daughter, Emily Reed. My heart froze. The name hit like a blow. I sat upright, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. My daughter, I said slowly. Yes, sir, she replied, steady and professional. She's here with us. She's safe, and she's been asking for you. I felt the blood drain from my face. For a few seconds, I couldn't even find words. Emily had been gone for 31 years, buried, grieved, lost. That's impossible, I whispered. Dr. Kim hesitated before speaking again, her tone softening. She has identification with her, and she remembers things, personal details, that only a family member could know. She has a small birthmark on her left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. She said you used to call it her lucky moon when she was little. I stopped breathing. My mind went blank. That mark, no one outside the family knew about it. We never mentioned it in reports or interviews, not even to the police. It was our secret something I made up when Emily was 3 and afraid of the dark. I'd tell her the moon was always watching over her, that it was her little patch of light when the world went black. Hearing a stranger describe it so clearly felt like being pulled between 2 realities, one I'd lived with for decades, and one that couldn't possibly exist. Where is she? I finally asked, my voice shaking. She's in the psychiatric unit at St. Mary's, Dr. Kim said gently. She was brought in 2 days ago, after a crisis episode. She's stable now, but she keeps saying she finally knows who she is and that she needs to see you. I looked over at the clock again. 3:49 a.m. Seattle was nearly 5 hours away from where I lived in Spokane. I didn't even stop to think. I just said, I'm on my way, and hung up. Behind me, my wife, Grace, stirred. Tom, she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Who was that? I hesitated. Someone from a hospital, I said. They think they've found Emily. Grace sat up immediately, the confusion on her face hardening into fear. No, Tom. Not again. We'd had calls like this before, though not for many years. Con artists, cruel people who found our story online and thought they could squeeze something from grief. They always got the details wrong, hair color, wrong, school, wrong timeline. But this, the crescent birthmark, that wasn't public. She knew about the lucky moon, I said quietly. Grace's hands trembled in her lap. Tom, please, don't do this to yourself again. I have to see for myself, I told her already, pulling on jeans from the chair by the bed. If it's real, I'll call you. If it's not, you'll know I tried. She didn't answer right away. After 42 years of marriage, she didn't need to. She just looked at me with that steady, worried gaze that said she understood, even if she didn't agree. Outside, the night air bit through my jacket. I drove off with nothing but a thermos of coffee and a heart that wouldn't slow down. The road ahead stretched into darkness, but I barely saw it. All I could think about was a little girl with a crescent-shaped birthmark clutching my hand on nights she was too scared to sleep. And the unthinkable question repeating in my mind, What if she's really alive? The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a thin ribbon of grey swallowed by darkness. The world was still asleep, but my mind was wide awake. The clock on the dashboard glowed 4:12 a.m. I had already been driving for half an hour, yet it felt like I'd been on this road my whole life, chasing something I could never quite reach. Grace had begged me not to go. She stood in the doorway, her robe pulled tight, her eyes full of quiet fear. She didn't yell, didn't argue, just whispered, "Tom, please don't do this to yourself again." And I couldn't blame her. She had seen me break before, seen me crumble under hope that always turned to dust. But this time felt different. That tiny detail, the crescent-shaped birthmark, wasn't public. No one could have known. Not the reporters, not the police, not even the two people who once pretended to have found her before. Only family knew that. Only me. The silence in the car was deafening. No radio, no music, not even the hum of the heater could drown out the storm in my head. With every passing mile, memories crept, in some sharp as glass, others soft as fog. Emily was 17 when she disappeared. December 14th. It was one of those bitterly cold nights where your breath turned to smoke and the sky looked endless. She told us she was going to a friend's house after school. Later we learned she went to meet a boy, not the one we knew, not the polite kid who helped her with physics homework. This one was older, 23, a mechanic from the East Side. I remember the way Grace's face fell when the police told us, that quiet heartbreak mothers carry when they realize their little girl trusted the wrong person. They argued that night. He left her at a bus stop near Pike Street, close to 11. She was angry, embarrassed, standing alone in one of the worst parts of the city. She never came home. For 3 years we searched. Posters on light poles, newspaper ads, TV segments. We worked with police-hired private investigators we couldn't afford. Grace stopped sleeping. I stopped doing anything that wasn't work or searching. Every time the phone rang, I held my breath. Every knock at the door made my heart jolt. Hope became a cruel addiction. I couldn't let go of it, even when it kept tearing me apart. Then came 1996. The police found remains in a wooded area outside Tacoma. Female, around 17 to 19 years old. They couldn't confirm through dental records the damage was too severe, but the girl was wearing a silver ring, just like Emily's. The forensic report said they were 70% sure. 70%. At that point, 70 felt like a mercy, like permission to stop bleeding. We held a funeral. Grace ordered white lilies, Emily's favorite. We buried an empty casket because there wasn't enough left to bury. I remember standing there staring at that patch of fresh dirt, thinking maybe this was closure. Maybe I could finally breathe again. But closure, I learned, doesn't come from burying a box. It comes from truth, and we never really had that. After that, life went quiet in the worst way. The kind of quiet that doesn't heal, but hardens. Grace went back to church. I threw myself into work, building things with my hands, because fixing wood was easier than fixing grief. People stopped asking about Emily after a while. Friends meant well, but pity has an expiration date. Years passed. The posters faded. The police stopped calling. And yet every time I saw a girl with long brown hair walking across the street, I'd slow down just to make sure. I told myself it was habit, but deep down it was survival. because the moment I stopped looking, it meant I'd truly lost her. Now, 31 years later, I was on the road again. Same direction, same city, same fragile thread of hope holding me together. Only this time, I wasn't searching for a ghost. I was driving toward a voice that had said my daughter's name like it still belonged to her. The sun hadn't risen yet, but a faint blue light was starting to touch the horizon. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to no one. Please let this be real. If it wasn't, I didn't know if I could survive breaking again. By the time I reached Seattle, the city was just waking up. The sun was still hiding behind the skyline, casting a pale grey light that made everything look colder than it was. I parked in front of St. Mary's Hospital and sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. The place looked massive, too. White, too clean, too indifferent. I'd driven past it before, on business trips, never realizing that one day this building would become the center of my entire world. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and something faintly metallic. People moved quietly through the halls, nurses pushing carts, patients in wheelchairs, voices echoing softly over the sound of distant machines. I told the woman at the front desk my name and that I was here to see Dr. Laura Kim. She nodded, made a call, and told me to wait. 15 minutes later, a woman in her late 30s approached. She was small, dressed neatly in a grey cardigan and flats, her eyes kind, but tired in the way of people who carry other people's pain for a living. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Laura Kim. Thank you for coming so quickly." I managed a nod. "You said she's here." "She is?" Laura said, her tone careful. "But before you see her, I need to prepare you. Emily. Well, she's been living under a different name. For the past 31 years, she's been known as Rachel Moore." The name didn't register. "Rachel," I repeated, like saying it would make sense of anything. "She's been in Seattle this whole time," Laura continued. "She's had various jobs waitressing, cleaning work, sometimes homeless. She doesn't remember everything yet. 2 days ago, she was brought in after a breakdown. When she saw one of those old missing person posters on social media, your daughter's poster, something inside her broke open. I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, my mind numb. I had seen those old posts shared a few times online through cold case pages. I never thought they would actually reach her. Laura started walking, and I followed her down a long corridor. The smell of floor polish mixed with something sterile hung in the air. "She's been having flashbacks," Laura said. "Pieces of memories. A house with blue shutters. A mother who made waffles on Saturday mornings. A father who built her a treehouse but was terrified of heights." I stopped walking. The treehouse. That summer came rushing back like a wave, the hammer slipping in my sweaty hands, my knees shaking as I stood on the ladder while Emily laughed from below. Grace kept yelling from the kitchen window for me to come down before I broke my neck. Emily had named the treehouse the Sky Room. She said it was the only place she felt brave. "I built that treehouse," I said quietly, "and yes, I was terrified of heights." Laura looked at me, and I could see her professional composure soften for a moment. "Then I think you already know," she said. "The woman in that room remembers more than we ever could have guessed. But she's scared, Mr. Reed. She's afraid you'll be angry. Afraid you won't believe her, or worse, that you will believe her, but won't want her anymore." That last part hit me hard. I hadn't thought about what 31 years could do to someone, the life she must have lived, the things she must have seen. Trauma doesn't freeze time. It changes you, carves you into someone new. Maybe that's what terrified her most, that she wasn't the daughter I remembered, and that I wasn't the father she'd left behind. We stopped outside a white door with the number 312 on it. Laura placed her hand on the handle, but didn't open it right away. "She's inside," she said softly. "I'll give you some privacy. But I'll be right here if you need anything." I nodded. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. When the door opened, the room was flooded with morning light. A small window framed the grey sky outside. A woman sat by it. Her back turned, her hair streaked with grey, and pulled into a loose bun. She wore a faded hospital t-shirt. Her shoulders hunched as if the air itself was heavy. For a moment, I couldn't move. This wasn't the 17-year-old girl frozen in my memories. This was someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes, since then someone who had survived. And yet somehow I knew before she even turned around. The shape of her shoulders, the way she held her hands in her lap. I didn't need DNA. That was my daughter. When I stepped into room 312, the first thing I noticed was the light. It poured through the window in soft streaks, touching everything with a kind of quiet mercy. For a second I thought I'd walked into the wrong room. The woman by the window was older, thinner. Her posture guarded like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Her hair was streaked with grey, her clothes simple and loose, as if she'd borrowed time itself to wear for the day. Then she turned, and I forgot how to breathe. Her face had changed, of course it had, but her eyes hadn't. The colour, the way they held mine, steady and unflinching, even when scared, it was like time folded in on itself. For a moment I was 31 years younger, standing in the kitchen watching my teenage daughter storm off after another argument about curfew. She stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure her legs would hold her. The sunlight hit her face fully now, and I saw the tiny scar above her eyebrow, the one from when she fell off her bike at age 7, chasing the neighbour's dog down the street. My throat tightened. She whispered one word. "Dad." I hadn't heard that sound in 3 decades yet. It cracked me open like it had been only yesterday. I wanted to say her name, but my voice wouldn't come. She took a shaky step forward, and I met her halfway. When I pulled her into my arms, she felt small, fragile. Her body trembled, as if she didn't quite believe this was real. For a moment, neither did I. She didn't smell like Emily. She smelled like antiseptic soap and fear. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the shape of her, the weight of her head against my shoulder, exactly where it used to rest. We didn't say anything for a long time. Just held on, like we were afraid the other might vanish again if we let go. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking in places. "I don't remember everything yet, but I remember the treehouse. I remember you teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway. You ran behind me for hours, even though your back was killing you." I laughed, a raw, broken sound that barely made it out. She kept going. "I remember you reading to me before bed, Narnia with all the voices. I don't know if I can be her again," she said. "I don't know if I'm still that girl. I've been someone else for so long." I looked at her, really looked at her. There was so much pain in her eyes, but beneath it, something else, a kind of quiet courage. The same spark she had as a kid, when she'd climbed too high in the apple tree and yelled down that she wasn't afraid. I reached for her hands. They were rougher now, colder. Life had left its marks, but they were still hers. "You don't have to be that girl," I told her softly. "You just have to be you. That's enough." Her lip trembled. Then she nodded and collapsed into me again. I held her tighter, feeling the years fall away and the weight of all the could-have-beens pressing against my chest. We sat together for what felt like hours. The hospital room faded around us, the hum of machines, the footsteps in the hallway, even the morning light. There was only the sound of her breathing, uneven and real. For 31 years I had rehearsed this moment in my head. I imagined how I'd react, what I'd say, what she'd say back. None of it matched this. It was messier, quieter, heavier, but also more human. Because when you lose someone, hope becomes a ghost that never stops whispering. And when that ghost walks back into your arms, you don't ask questions. You just hold on. After the first hour of silence, Emily began to speak in fragments. Her voice came out soft, as if she were testing the words to see if they would hold. She told us about the night she vanished, not as a neat story, but as scattered bright and dark pieces that fit together like a broken mirror. She remembered leaving the bus stop, angry, the cold air stinging her face. A woman had approached friendly at first, offered coffee, offered a lift, offered help. Emily thought she was safe for a moment. After that, everything splintered. Faces blurred into one another. Houses moved. Names changed. She learned to answer to Rachel Moore because that was the name handed to her when papers and stories were made up around her. Survival, she told me, is a full-time job when no one is looking for you. Those early years had been a chain of small decisions that were never really her choices. Work where the hours were long and the pay was small. Moving from one temporary shelter to another. Someone always telling her the next place would be better. If you've spent months, years pretending not to be noticed, you get good at slipping into the background. You stop asking who you used to be, because asking is dangerous. Knowing might make you a target again. She talked about losing whole stretches of time. Years that existed only as impressions, smells a song, the feel of a sweatshirt. The brain, she said, does strange things to keep you alive. It tucks trauma away, like putting delicate things into a locked box. For some people, that box stays shut. For others, it cracks open in pieces. For Emily, the cracks were small until a single photograph on a social feed turned into a pry bar. 3 days before she was brought to St. Mary's, someone shared an old missing person post. Her 17-year-old face stared out from the screen. Something inside her stopped being numb. A flash of a treehouse, the scent of cinnamon rolls on a Saturday morning, a laugh she knew belonged to her. It was like waking from a long sleep and realizing the world had been pretending all along. She walked into a clinic for help when the memories crashed back in waves she couldn't ride alone. Hearing her tell it, I felt each fragment like a blow. It's one thing to read about dissociation or to listen to experts. It's another to hear the person you raised describe how memory itself can be both shield and prison. She remembered enough to prove she was my daughter, but not enough to write the story straight. There were details too specific to be made up the way our cat Winston used to sleep on the radiator, the scar on her knee from falling off the neighbor's fence, the nickname we called her when she swore she could build a rocket. Those things lined up small beacons that no con artist could have invented. But there were gaps, and those gaps matter. They are where crime hides. Years of being moved, groomed forward. To accept a new name often point to organized exploitation. Patterns show up across cases: a friendly approach in a vulnerable place, quick reassignments, doctored papers, a life built on lies. Emily's story fit that pattern, and that meant this wasn't just a private tragedy. It was a part of something larger that needed to be investigated. Dr. Kim explained the clinical picture kindly and plainly. What Emily experienced fits with prolonged abuse and dissociative coping. When your identity is taken piece by piece, the work to reclaim it is slow and fragile. It can take months or years of therapy to weave those scattered pieces into a life that feels coherent again. We talked about the immediate steps. The hospital secured her medical needs. They arranged for trauma-informed therapy and connected her with a social worker who specialized in trafficking survivors. A DNA test would confirm what our hearts already did. The police would reopen cold case files, and a trafficking task force would follow any leads she could remember. None of these actions were magic. They were the scaffolding necessary for both legal closure and for the slow work of healing. If you find yourself in a situation like this, or care for someone who does, there are practical things to do. First, seek trauma-informed professionals. Standard counseling is not enough when memory has been suppressed by survival. Second, document carefully. Small details. Songs, smells, stray phrases can become critical clues for investigators. Third, connect with support groups. Survivors who have navigated the same terrain can offer practical strategies and reduce the sense of isolation. Finally, if trafficking is suspected, report to local task forces or national hotlines. Coordinated teams have resources and legal channels that families usually do not. Listening to Emily, I felt the full weight of what she'd been required to do simply to survive. She had become adept at erasing herself. Now the work was the reverse, learning how to exist again as someone with a past, a name, a family. There is no tidy path from disappearance to reunion. But there are steps that reduce harm and build safety. We were about to start them slowly, carefully, with the humility of people who know that healing does not follow a script. That night in the hospital, we held the pieces as best we could. We did not ask for miracles. We asked for truth, for steadiness, and for time. Emily had returned with half a life's worth of missing pages. Our job, and hers, was to begin reading them together. 2 weeks later, Dr. Laura Kim called me back to her office. The moment I stepped inside, I knew she had the results. Her expression was calm, but there was a kind of gravity in her eyes that made my chest tighten. Grace sat beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly it almost hurt. Laura didn't waste words. The DNA results confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. Emily was my daughter. Every cell, every strand, there was no mistake. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It was as if the air in the room shifted. 31 years of grief, doubt, and guilt suddenly collided with the impossible truth. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Grace pressed her face into her hands, whispering something that sounded like "thank you" over and over. But Laura wasn't finished. "There's something else," she said, carefully folding her hands on the desk. The police reopened the case connected to the remains found in 1996. They've extracted DNA and cross-referenced it with the national database. It belongs to another missing girl. Her name was Maya Nguyen. She disappeared from Tacoma in 1995. The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. I leaned back, trying to absorb what that meant. We had buried the wrong child. For 30 years, another family had lived in limbo, waiting for a call that never came, lighting candles for a daughter they still believed was alive. And we unknowingly had laid her to rest under a stone with our daughter's name on it. It was a truth too painful to celebrate. For every miracle, someone else had been left in darkness. Laura explained that the police had already contacted the Nguyen family. They were devastated, but also relieved to finally have an answer. After 3 decades of uncertainty, they could grieve with certainty. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something. Closure, even when it hurts, is a form of mercy. I thought about that word closure and realized how cruelly uneven it is. For one family, it arrives as a homecoming. For another, as a shovel of dirt over what's left of hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day of Emily's funeral in my mind. The rain, the pastor's voice, the way Grace's hands shook when she dropped a white rose on the casket. I'd told myself we'd done the right thing, that we'd finally buried our grief. But now I understood we'd buried someone else's child, someone else's story. When I looked at Emily the next morning, I saw that she understood too. She sat at the hospital window, quiet, holding her coffee with both hands. She was my age, she said softly. That girl in the grave. Yes, I said. She had a family, she whispered. Someone was waiting for her. Just like you waited for me. I nodded, unable to answer. The guilt wasn't logical, we hadn't known, but grief doesn't care about logic. It only cares about weight. Emily turned toward me, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them since the day we found her. Then we have to do something, she said. For her. For people like her. Dr. Kim later told me it's common for survivors to reach for meaning after trauma. Some spiral inward. Others reach outward, trying to build something from the wreckage. Emily wanted to reach. She wanted the truth to count for something more than just DNA results and case files. The authorities began combing through old records, linking Maya's case to the same trafficking network that had taken Emily. Many of the original perpetrators were long gone, dead, imprisoned, or vanished, but investigators promised to follow every lead. It wouldn't undo the past, but maybe it could stop the same story from being written again. Watching Emily talk to the detectives was both painful and awe-inspiring. Her voice was shaky but steady enough to tell them what she remembered. Every detail mattered now, not just for her, but for the girl who never made it home. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like truth being spoken after decades of silence. When I visited the old cemetery later that week, the headstone still bore Emily's name. The ground above it was calm, blanketed with wildflowers. I knelt there and whispered an apology to Maya, to her parents, to every family still waiting. Then I went home, sat beside my daughter, and promised her this, that our story would not end where another began. That we'd tell it loudly and truthfully until every lost girl had a name again. Because miracles mean nothing if they don't make the world a little kinder for someone else. The weeks that followed were heavy but purposeful, like trudging through deep snow, slow, exhausting, but moving forward all the same. The Seattle police reopened the cold case tied to Emily's disappearance. What had once been a closed file with a false ending was now part of a much larger investigation, a network of trafficking that had stretched across cities, swallowing hundreds of names and leaving families like mine in decades of silence. Emily agreed to cooperate. It wasn't an easy decision. Every memory she shared meant peeling back layers of pain she had buried to survive. She met with detectives almost daily, walking them through what she could remember: the people, the houses, the rules. Some details came like flashes of light. Others surfaced in fragments she could barely voice. Laura Kim was there for every session, guiding her through the process like an anchor in a storm. Trauma, she explained, doesn't follow a straight line. It circles back, it hides it, waits for the smallest trigger before it comes crashing down. So they went slow, step by step. When the time came for Emily to testify in a closed hearing, Grace and I waited outside the courtroom. The hall was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I could hear muffled voices through the door, and imagined my daughter sitting under that pale ceiling, facing a panel of strangers who would ask her to relive every horror she'd fought to forget. Grace reached for my hand. After 30 years of grieving the girl we thought we'd lost, she was learning to love the woman who had come back, scarred, cautious, but alive. We both were. This wasn't the same Emily who used to twirl through the kitchen singing off-key while pancakes burned on the stove. This was a woman who had learned to survive by disappearing. A woman who had built armor out of endurance and silence. And that's something no parent prepares for, to meet your child again and realize she's lived a lifetime you weren't there for. You don't get to rewrite it. You can only stand beside it. When the hearing ended, Emily walked out, pale but steady. The detectives nodded respectfully as she passed, and Laura gave a small smile of quiet pride. I stood up, unsure whether to hug her or give her space. She made the choice for me, stepping into my arms and whispering, "It's done." But it wasn't done. Not really. Healing never happens in neat chapters. It's a long, uneven climb, and some days you slide back. There were nights when Emily woke screaming, lost in dreams where every knock on the door meant danger. Grace would sit beside her until dawn, humming softly the same lullaby she used to sing when Emily was a child. Those moments reminded me that love doesn't fix everything, but it gives you the strength to keep showing up. In the months that followed, the investigation uncovered a web of crimes stretching back decades. Many of the key offenders were already dead or imprisoned for unrelated charges, but their names still mattered. It meant the truth was finally documented, their victims acknowledged. Justice in its imperfect human form was at least written down for history to see. Emily's courage inspired more survivors to come forward. Some of them reached out through advocacy groups, saying they saw their own story in hers. That's when I began to understand that this wasn't just about our family anymore. It was about giving others permission to speak, to believe that silence doesn't have to be permanent. Grace found her way back to her church community, not for forgiveness, but for grounding. I took up woodworking again, building small pieces of furniture and donating them to a local shelter that helped trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. It wasn't charity. It was a way to turn my hands into something steady, something useful. And Emily, for the first time, started to dream in the future tense. Therapy helped her piece together a self beyond survival. She talked about studying social work, maybe joining the same outreach program that had helped her. If my story can stop even one girl from vanishing, she said, then it wasn't all for nothing. There was a quiet dignity in how she said it. Not bitterness, not revenge, just resolve. Watching her reclaim her life taught me something I wish I'd known earlier, that justice isn't always a courtroom verdict or a name crossed off a list. Sometimes it's a daughter deciding that what was meant to destroy her will become the reason she helps others stand. And as a father, there is no verdict more powerful than that. Spring arrived in Seattle slowly, as if the city itself needed time to thaw. By March, the cherry blossoms had started to bloom again, dusting the sidewalks in pale pink petals. It felt symbolic, somehow fragile things returning to life after a long, bitter season. Emily had been out of the hospital for a few months. She was living in a small apartment, not far from downtown, close enough to her therapy clinic and the community center where she attended group sessions. The place was modest, a second-hand couch-chipped coffee table and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon and detergent. But it was hers. For the first time in decades, she had her own key, her own address, her own space to heal. Grace and I helped her furnish it. She picked out the dishes. I built her a bookshelf that leaned a little to the left, but she laughed and said it gave the room personality. Grace bought curtains the color of morning sky and stocked her freezer with homemade soup. It was strange watching her start over at 48, but there was beauty in it too. Survival had turned her cautious, but independence made her brave. Her two younger brothers, Ethan and Daniel, came to visit soon after. They had been kids when Emily disappeared, 14 and 11. Now they were men with jobs, mortgages, and children of their own. They remembered their sister as a teenager with wild hair and louder opinions, the kind who sang along to every song on the radio, even when she didn't know the words. The woman they met now was quieter, gentler, with eyes that seemed to carry 1,000 miles of road behind them. The first meeting was awkward. They didn't know whether to hug or to sit or to talk about the past. But Emily broke the tension by pouring them coffee in mismatched mugs and saying, "I hope you still take it with too much sugar." The joke landed. Slowly the room softened. They shared childhood stories, comparing what they remembered and what Emily could now recall. Ethan showed her photos of his kids, her niece and nephew. Daniel told her about his husband and the home they'd built in Oregon. Emily listened with a kind of quiet ache, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. Later she told me it was like being handed pieces of a puzzle she thought had been burned away. Healing is rarely cinematic. It's not a single moment of triumph, but 1,000 small choices: getting out of bed, calling a friend, showing up to therapy even when it hurts. Emily did all of it. Some days she was stronger, other days she crumbled and had to start again. Grace and I learned that love after trauma looks different too. It means giving space without disappearing, listening without trying to fix. One morning over breakfast, Emily told us she had applied for a vocational program in social work. She wanted to help other survivors rebuild their lives. "If I can guide even one person out of the dark," she said, "then maybe all those years meant something." Grace smiled through tears. I just nodded, too proud and too overwhelmed to speak. Seeing her move toward purpose instead of pain, it was the first time I'd seen real light in her since the day we found her. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. She still had nights when the memories clawed back, and I still caught myself flinching every time the phone rang late. But there was rhythm, now a sense of normal that didn't feel borrowed. On weekends we'd visit her apartment, and she'd make coffee and laugh about how she could finally bake cinnamon rolls without burning them. One Sunday she said something that stayed with me. I used to think surviving meant forgetting, she said, but maybe it means remembering and living anyway. That's what healing really looks like. Not erasing the past, but learning to carry it differently. As a family, we were still learning too. The daughter we lost was gone, and the woman who returned was someone new, But she was still ours. Different didn't mean broken. It meant changed, reshaped, resilient. We didn't need to go back to who we were before. We just needed to love each other as we were now. And in that small apartment filled with second-hand furniture and morning light we did. The morning light filtered softly through the window of Emily's apartment, painting everything in a gentle gold. The city outside was waking up the low hum of traffic, the sound of a coffee shop doorbell, the rhythm of life moving forward. Inside things were quiet. Just the two of us, a pot of coffee between us, and a batch of slightly overdone cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter. She smiled shyly. "They're not as good as Mom's," she said. I took a bite, pretending to judge seriously. "They're close," I said. "Maybe even better." She laughed, rolling her eyes, but I could see how much it meant to her, the simple act of being woman as someone who could make something good again. For a long time, we sat in that easy silence that only comes when words aren't needed. Then Emily looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you remember the treehouse?" she asked. I chuckled softly. How could I forget I built it, even though I was terrified of heights? She tilted her head, curious. "Why did you do it if you were so scared?" I looked at her for a moment, taking in the woman she'd become, the same eyes I'd known since she was little, but deeper, now wiser. "Because you wanted one," I said, simply. "And when you love someone, you climb whatever mountain they need you to." She smiled, the kind of smile that starts in the heart before it reaches the face. "That's good," she said quietly, "because I think I might need you to climb a few more mountains before we're done." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Then that's what I'll do," I told her. "However many it takes. I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the light grew warmer, spilling across the floor like a slow-moving tide. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The past still hung between us, not as a weight anymore, but as something that shaped the air we breathed. It wasn't gone, and it never would be. But it didn't hurt the same way it used to. I thought about how much we'd lost, 31 years of birthdays, holidays, late-night talks that never happened. Yet somehow, sitting there in that small kitchen with coffee and laughter, it didn't feel like time stolen. It felt like time returned. Healing isn't about erasing what broke you. It's about finding the strength to build something new on top of the ruins. And as I looked at my daughter alive, rebuilding brave, I realized that's exactly what we were doing. When I left later that morning, she stood by the door and waved. The sun caught her hair, turning the strands gold. For a second, she looked like the little girl who used to climb trees and call down for me to watch her from below. Only now I wasn't the one afraid of heights. I walked to the car, heart steady, the world bright around me. We had lost 31 years we could never get back. But we had this morning. We had now. And sometimes that's enough.